Great afternoon, everyone. We are at 2 minutes past. So if anyone else is joining while we're doing some of the gentle introductions, then that's absolutely fine. So first of all, thank you all so much for coming. I think just some admin. So there is a Q&A function in the chat. We have left 10 minutes at the end to answer some of those questions as you send them in. So please do put them in there. And if for any reason we run over, we don't get a chance to answer all of them, hopefully there'll still be a way in which we can respond to some of those. So I'll introduce myself. So my name's Justine. I'm a strategic commissioning manager at Sheffield City Council, one of 4 people that's going to be hosting you this afternoon. So we're going to have Rebecca Smith, also who's a service manager at Target Housing, a social landlord working across Yorkshire and other areas. Sam Chu, who's a forensic psychologist, and also Poppy towards the end, who's a peer support worker, is going to be talking about some of her lived experience on the topic that we are covering today. So I think we'll probably make a start. So for a bit of context today, so I'm going to first sort of intro in a bit of what we've been doing in Sheffield, looking at the cohort and what work's been happening across the partnership. But I opened this presentation, sounds a bit of a cheesy story, but it is true. So I was in a group in some training, and we were asked, kind of a bit tongue-in-cheek, to write down our answer to kind of a big question of who are you? And the table I was on inevitably veered towards 3 main things. So personality, experiences, and relationships with other people. And when we translate that into our work setting, I think this understanding of relationships with others is inherent in other areas and other fields. So in substance use and recovery, connection is like a social antidote to addiction. In young people services, we recognise the influence and power of friendships and peers. And in children and family services, the aim is always to work with parents to improve the lives of that family. And something that's really interesting that's arisen out of the work we've been doing locally in Sheffield for the last 3 years is that question of to what extent do we listen to and work with mothers when their children are temporarily or permanently removed from their care. So we wanted to look at what was the prevalence of child removal. Some of that is national data, some of that's local data to us in Sheffield, and particularly within cohorts of disadvantaged women. And yeah, so there's kind of my role is going to be a bit intro in some of that. Before I get too much into it, I always like to preface it with a bit of when we talk about child removal, what do we mean? I think it's always helpful to clarify before we kind of get too far ahead. So national legislation, the Children's Act 1989, gives local authorities the responsibility for the welfare of children living in that locality. So if there are concerns relating to risk of neglect, physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, children's social care can intervene and ultimately remove children from their parents or carers. There's obviously a range of outcomes once court proceedings are concluded, which may be foster care, adoption, SGOs with special guardianship orders with wider family members. And the amount of contact that parent or carer has with that child once the process has taken place also varies. So part of what I'm responsible for in my role is a cohort of homelessness prevention services, but also the Changing Futures programme, which is a national programme. But the cohort is people who are the furthest away from services and experiencing the most disadvantage and crisis. And some of the women we support have ranged from kind of having no contact to letter contact once a year, sometimes in-person visits. Obviously, it is a sliding scale of contact that some of the mothers have after removal. So like I say, we wanted to look at the research and data on the prevalence of child removal. It is generally limited, is what we found. So across England, approximately 84,000 children were looked after in March 2023. And we know that removal proceedings disproportionately remove children from their mother's care because women and mothers are up to 6 times more likely to be the primary carer. So we said, well, what does that mean for Sheffield? So we got data from Sheffield Social Care Services and found that between 2008 and 2022, a total of 1,132 mothers had one instance of removal, and of those, 17% had multiple instances. So in this time period, there were on average 19 new mothers and 135 new children experiencing removal for the first time every year. The most prevalent age ranges of the women experiencing removal for the first time were 18 to 24, followed by 25 to 30, and then 31 to 35. And of the women who experienced their first instance of child removal between that 18 and 24 range, 23%, so nearly a quarter, went on to experience further removals of children. And what we know for, particularly in the cohorts who experience the most disadvantage, those removals often occur at birth. So nationally, there is a researcher, a very prominent researcher in the UK called Karen Broadhurst, and her research on this cohort, and particularly this study for women who'd had multiple children removed, found that over half were under the age of 24 at the first removal, a quarter returned to family court within 7 years, and 40% of those women had been through the care system themselves. So the information that we were getting out of Sheffield very much chimed with some of the national research that Karen Broadhurst had done. And when she reviewed the childhood experiences, I think it was a selection of about 70 women, she found that most had experienced poverty, teenage and unplanned pregnancies, childhood trauma, and a lack of support networks. So the whole picture is what comes across really strongly, and what's evident is that this is predominantly a young cohort of women. They have complex histories of abuse and exploitation, and that by the time their children are going into care, those women themselves have already been repeatedly let down by public services. So her research also highlighted child removal as a gateway to further disadvantage and a trigger for an escalation of problems. So issues that may have been there already, for example, such as unplanned pregnancies, abuse and violence, offending and homelessness, all of that often increase in severity and frequency post-child removal. And when we did a lot of work in Sheffield about speaking to women with lived experience, and what they told us was that escalation of problems is kind of multiple contributing factors to that, such as the loss of hope, the loss of identity as a mother, the psychological trauma of the removal was left unaddressed largely by services such as, limited access to counselling or long waiting lists. And that same trauma increased their vulnerability to further exploitation and abuse. So if there was domestic abuse with a partner or ex-partner, the loss of their children pushed them back into harmful situations because they didn't feel like they had any other choice or much hope following the removal. We also spoke to charities in Sheffield, so that included the Rough Sleep Industry Outreach Team, a women's centre, 2 organisations who support women affected by the sex industry. We also looked at our own cohort in Changing Futures and found that on average about 85 to 95% of the women that were supported across those 5 teams had experienced child removal. And of those, 90% were also experiencing homelessness or in insecure housing. So all of that to say really that a significant proportion of some of the most vulnerable women and children in our society are being affected by child removal, and this is a systemic issue rather than an anecdotal one. And really what rung true was that consistent approach across multiple organisations is required to prevent an escalation of need, regardless of the point of intervention. So if there has been one child removed in that household or from that mother, intervention at that point can still prevent an escalation of a further 2, 3, 4, 5 pregnancies where the children are removed at birth. So like I said, we spoke to quite a few women with lived experience about their overlapping experiences of homelessness and the other component parts of multiple disadvantage, as well as child removal. And this is what they told us. So they said that although there were services offering support for specific presenting needs, such as their substance use, few of them asked about their children or viewed them as a mother, and that led to that feeling of the loss of motherhood. There was a lack of support to understand and navigate complex systems related to child removal, homelessness, and other support services. So that intensity of support that they needed either wasn't there. To navigate some really complex legal systems in particular. A contributing factor to their support needs being unmet prior to social care involvement or leading to an escalation of social care involvement was around the lack of gender-informed service provision. It's not something that's unusual. We know that is the case for women. They had a lack of trust in the system already due to their experiences as children, as well as in kind of early adulthood, and didn't feel able to overcome this without support that may or may not have been there for them. Their housing situation often created barriers to their children being returned to their care and reunification. So I'll come back to this a little bit later on, but that was something that really, really stood out. There wasn't a recognition that their intrinsic motivation to engage with services was linked to their identity as a mother, and that they wanted to do things which continued that identity. So it was felt that the children were removed, not physically in their care, and therefore that kind of element of their life just seemed to disappear. But they also talked a lot about the shame and the stigma around child removal, and that feeling of blame that comes not only from potential like family and friends, but some of that stigma that is perpetuated by the wider community. And they had a desire and a hope to parent and carried that sense of obligation to their removed children that came out really strongly, even if they had absolutely no contact with them and hadn't for some of them 5-10 years, that their children was something that they thought of every single day. And so what was clear from listening to them was this fundamental experience of ambiguous loss. So their children weren't dead, so they weren't treated as if they were experiencing a bereavement, but they were grieving the death of their relationship with their children and the loss of the experience of motherhood. So when we looked at the data, we looked at women's experiences, we wanted to then look at, well, what is the service provision for this cohort of women? So on this map, the green dots are a national charity called Pause. I do have to say I didn't create this. I haven't actually copied and pasted the link of the website of the group that did this, but I'll make sure to put that in. I can't take credit for this map. But the green dots are the national charity Pause. The blue dots are where areas have created and commissioned their own services to support women experiencing child removal, and the purple blocks are counties where they have family drug and alcohol courts. Family drug and alcohol courts are where there is a kind of a hub model, basically. So there's a domestic abuse support worker, substance use worker, social worker, mental health professional in some capacity, and they will kind of wrap around the person basically at the point of which it's escalating to child protection and removal. And so just from that, as you can see in England, there is a postcode lottery when it comes to services. And not only that, but eligibility criteria for those services can create barriers. So I've listed those here. Age, the amount of time that's passed since removal, the woman's contraceptive choice, if they have any custody of remaining children. Support sometimes only starts once the legal proceedings have concluded. And then that support could stop if the mother becomes pregnant again. And like I mentioned before, that navigating of complex legal systems, that came out as something that not many services are commissioned to support people while that legal process is taking place. And some of that support kind of rushes in the aftermath of child removal when it could have, ideally have been offered earlier. So like I said before, we have needs-specific services, but what the women were telling us was that not many of those, if any, are really set up with much capacity to also support around child removal. The legal process can take a long time, anywhere from at least 6 to 24 months. Not many services are set up and commissioned to be able to offer that really, really long-term support. And yeah, so in addition to the barriers that I've already mentioned, the statutory and legislation and statutory duties, particularly within the homelessness and social care system, create barriers to reunification. So when we consider that, national research and also local research in other areas finds that domestic abuse is one of the main driving factors in housing instability and homelessness for women, and also a really, really large contributing factor around child removal. It feels like, again, it's a systemic issue that is disproportionately affecting women and mothers. So part of that work, when we spoke to women with lived experience, we also were asking about their experiences of homelessness. And these three things came out really strongly. So women who were under occupying in social housing could be financially sanctioned and pushed further into poverty, calling into question their ability to maintain a tenancy. So if they were previously in a 2-bed property, the child's been removed from their care. They want to maintain that 2-bed property in the hope of working with social care and getting that child returned to them. But there are processes and legislation which, like I said, could sanction them for doing that. If women do leave their accommodation, they're fleeing abuse and violence and exploitation, often placed in shared and temporary accommodation because of the housing crisis that can be for long periods of time. And this accommodation is generally unsuitable for children to visit. So when we spoke to women, they were saying that their social workers were unable to complete parts of their assessment and part evidencing that they were able to kind of take care of their children, because assessing sort of the home environment when you live in temporary accommodation was a real challenge in the assessment. And for some women who are able and have the support system in place to potentially live with family and friends, they may need to relocate, and that might be over long distances, and they have to travel to see their children if they've gone out of county, for example. And some of the really practical and logistical challenges of that and making it to contact and or factoring part of the assessment. So yeah, and that just may not be practically possible dependent upon the mother's situation and what resources they have to do that. And so there was this group of women who were caught in the middle of these two systems and sort of pulled in opposite directions. So both the homelessness and social care system claiming to, kind of be aspirational. So, if you do all these things, we want to be able to return your children to your care. And, we don't want people in temporary accommodation in long periods of time. We want people to be managing tenancies in the community and feel safe. But those two, when it comes to child removal, it kind of inherently kind of pulling against one another, and both exacerbating the trauma of them as well. Again, I forgot to put the link in it, but Agenda Alliance, you may have seen, wrote a report which goes into a lot of detail about the stigma women in this cohort face and some of the systemic barriers linked to housing and social care, and also linking into other forms of institutional oppression, such as racism as well. So they spoke to lots of women with lived experience and included all of that in the report. So I will find it and put a link in the chat because I have forgot to put it in the PowerPoint. So all of that to say, to try and address some of these barriers that we know exist, both myself and then Target Housing, so Rebecca's here from Target Housing to talk about the Growth Project. We reached out to one another to discuss how we could bring a service to life that tries to address all of these things. So I will stop talking in that vein, and I will hand over to Rebecca, who's going to talk about the Growth Project.
Thank you, Justine. Can you hear me before I...
Yeah, I can hear you, yeah.
Perfect. I'll try and share my screen in the hope it works. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Please let me know if you can't hear me. I've had a couple of technical problems leading up to this afternoon's webinar. But my name's Rebecca Smith. I'm a service manager at Target Housing. Justine sort of shared that we operate mainly in the north, so across South Yorkshire, Hull, Grimsby. But the growth project specifically is just operational in Sheffield at the moment. So all of the work and the background information that Justine has shared, they entered into a conversation with Target's head of development, Lindsay. So I can't take credit for thinking about what this model might look like. I came into post when we were just sort of mobilising. We had a look at a model and put an application into the big lottery to create and deliver a 18-month pilot for a service to support 12, so a small cohort, but 12 women who are experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness in Sheffield and have experienced children removed from the care. Now, as we go on, you will see that that criteria had changed from co-production sessions that we'd completed. The initial service criteria were to have experienced multiple child removal, but listening to some women's experience, we've changed that quite quickly to offer some early intervention and offer support at a period of or in current care proceedings. So I'm just going to talk today a little bit around the growth service model and service delivery and how we operate up in Sheffield. So Justine's touched on a lot of the lived experience. I'm going to sort of share some information around the co-production sessions and the co-production that is forever ongoing within the service. So before the service mobilised and went live, there were some co-production sessions held to try and get an understanding of what women need, what women want, that would help shape what the service would look like moving forward. And there were quite a few themes that arose, but some of the common themes for multiple women were advocacy. So a lot of women who had to sort of attend and access a lot of formal social care meetings, whether that's SIM meetings, core groups, PLOs, case conferences. Anyone that has supported or been attendance in those meetings can appreciate how formal they are and a really overwhelming and daunting space for mums, particularly, who is at the centre of possibly looking at legal action to remove children from care. And although there was a lot of professionals around that table, a lot of women felt as though there was nobody that was solely there as their support. There was people which they appreciate is there to make sure that families are safe and that children are safe, but relationships were quite fractured with professionals around that table and they didn't feel they have anyone advocating on their behalf in them situations. So that was a common theme that women felt was necessary when we're looking at the service model. And secure accommodation. So Justine's already alluded to a lot of the barriers faced for women that have experienced child removal. So the sort of temporary accommodation, it'd been really sort of insecure, under occupying, and the difficulty that women had shared around having contact or overnight contact when they're in a one-bedroom flat or they're in temporary accommodation or a B&B. So that were really important. And although the project is temporary, it is 18 months, a lot of emphasis is on looking at it feeling like a home with the possibility of that placement hopefully extending. Support through care proceedings. So we've seen the national and local picture, and there is, in Sheffield particularly, there is a commission service that works for women that's had children removed from the care, generally referrals from social care, to offer some intensive support, predominantly around loss and life after child removal. But what women were sort of requesting is that where is the earlier intervention? Where is the support at the point of care proceedings? And yes, as family support workers are facing that has had an impact on the relationship with the children. So specialist support earlier rather than after removal was a theme that came up in co-production sessions. Fair legal advice. So I think we knew as professionals that this was something that is quite niche, and if you aren't a care proceeding solicitor, can often feel like a really complex system to navigate. So imagine how women might feel when they're accessing or trying to access legal advice. So some feedback that we got is that there is a request, and it's generally on a letter that women are entering PLO, and it's a recommendation that they find themselves a care proceeding circumstances. But that there's maybe a number of phone calls with their solicitor, who will then request lots of information from social care's legal team and get all that sent over. But there were a lot of women never met their solicitor until I was in court and felt as though this person is representing me at one of the most important pivotal moments in my life, and they don't know me, they've never met me. So they felt as though it was sort of an unfair system. They weren't provided routine and consistent updates on the case. They felt as though they were sort of forever chasing and asking, and a lot of jargon that were really difficult to decipher. And so that was certainly a theme that women felt as though services could be more informed around. A trauma-informed approach, so an understanding of sort of past experiences and how that might impact how women might present now. Although there has been a lot of feedback from women around experiences whilst they're in care proceedings, because that may jeopardise. So feeling as though they're asked to be open and honest, but if they are, that could be used against them, or they could be criticised for that when we're looking at parenting assessments. So just creating a safe space where women feel able to share a lot about their past experiences. And access to timely and flexible therapy is a real common request that we see from children's services and sort of court-ordered therapy. And navigating NHS waiting lists can be difficult and long, and some people might have got timeframes that they have to access specific therapy by. And often it is you need to access a certain therapy. It's not just mental health support around your current experiences. There might be a request for CBT or EMDR in already a difficult, strained NHS system. And I know we've got Sam on that is going to be jumping on after me, who is offering psychological intervention as part of the offer under the Growth Project that we'll think about a little bit more later. Alice was just a quote from one of the co-production sessions, and we're thinking about child contact and support into child contact. And I think a lot of services have the understanding or impression that every time it's contact, of course, mums are got thing that will ever have to do, because they're going to contact and they aren't able to bring children back home with them. So, after these specific co-production sessions, this informed the service delivery. It became really apparent quite quickly that we need to try and get a better understanding and knowledge around family courts, which meant that we have now got access to a trauma-informed care proceeding solicitor who has been really helpful in sort of providing training and guidance to the frontline caseworkers, and does represent some of our women under service should they choose to use that solicitor. So service design, what it looks like. So we've got 12 units of dispersed accommodation. They're all more than one bed, so 2 3-bed properties. We try and offer the number of beds required. So if there is the possibility, or there's already overnight contact in place, or if in the future there's any possibility of unification, we want to be able to provide a space where that is a possibility. And we really tried to be mindful of what properties we're procuring and in what areas. So try to identify homes in areas that have got sort of low antisocial behaviour and low crime rates to feel as safe as possible for families. So the caseworkers work with a sort of intensive support and a navigator style model. They have low caseloads. Full-time staff have 6 women families that they're supporting. Women have got access to, which I'll speak about a little bit later on, but access to peer support. So we run monthly groups and drop-ins to access peer support from other women with similar experiences. Legal support, so we can get informal advice. We can sort of call care proceeding solicitor if anyone's not in proceedings but have got a question, and sort of signpost to solicitors that other women have found really helpful. And this is not something that I'm going to go into because we're not at a position to sort of be releasing yet, but together with the women that access the service and care proceedings solicitors, we are very close to finalising a family court guide toolkit for women that we're going to get sort of printed and distributed to other services. It's an easy step-by-step guide of when you're entering care proceedings, what to expect throughout the family court arena, which women have said would be really helpful for them to try and help navigate that. And then psychological intervention. So this is Sam's area, who's going to jump on later, but some one-to-one sessions, group work and family mediation. I'll leave that for Sam to update further. So some of this data is, it was pulled from the first 3 months of the service going live. So the service went live in September last year. We did accommodate a few women a little earlier, but the launch was in September last year. So we were looking, in the first 3 months, we had nearly 50 referrals and only 12 places. So obviously capacity was really tricky. But some of the reasons around social care involvement upon referral. So the referrals that we received in the first 3 months, out of the 49 that we had, 47, so that's the next page, but experiences of domestic abuse at the point of social care becoming involved, but the very different stages of social care involvement. So legal proceedings completed, so 27 that had no social care involved, so orders have been approved, and it could be that they're with family members on SGOs, they could have been adopted or in longer term foster care. We had 8 referrals where there was ongoing legal proceedings, so currently still in the family court arena. 10 referrals with informal removals, so sort of family arrangements placed with family members or friends or other carers, and pregnant and at risk of removal, and adult removed children. So we had referrals for a few women whose children were now adults that wouldn't have necessarily met the criteria for service. So the factors that would link to social care involvement, so as I've mentioned, out of the 49 in the first 3 months, 47 domestic abuse was a leading factor of social care involvement. And we know that the removal is gateway to further disadvantage, so that, you know, at the point of referral, these were some of the needs, but we know that that will have been exacerbated at the point of removal. So substance misuse were prevalent, mental health, neglect, women involved in sex work, learning disability and offending. And then some of the placements at the point of referral. So quite a variety of different placements for women upon referral into the growth projects. So we did have a few women that had a general needs local authority tenancy, and they may have needed to move for risk around domestic abuse, or sort of unable to afford the current accommodation due to under-occupying or debt, or, you know, increasing rent. We had some referrals from other housing associations. Predominantly there was a support provider in Sheffield that supports homeless families, but while they've been in that setting, children have been removed, so they no longer meet criteria to stay there. Some independent living units, and quite a few women that are sofa surfing. We went to some resettlement sessions in women's prisons, so we had a few referrals to try and support women upon release. Referrals from inpatient mental health wards, women that are currently rough sleeping, no fixed address. Temporary accommodation, you can see, was the highest, so generally referrals from Sheffield City Council for women that are in temporary placements, guest houses, B&Bs, and then refuge referrals. This is not a clear picture, it's sort of the first 3 months, but I've had quite a few more refuge referrals, so families that might have entered, or women that have experienced child removal and then gone into refuge spaces. So yeah, a variety of placements upon referral. So, you know, we've sort of touched on what we wanted and what women would have needed when we're looking at finding accommodation and provision. So all the properties are, like I said, houses, more than one bed. They all come fully furnished and moved into. To move into. Women are encouraged to, if they want to decorate and to make it feel like home. And And as a social landlord provider, we really understand the importance of offering high quality homes to people that we are supporting. And this co-op particularly will have accessed temporary accommodation such as Airbnbs and things, and it's not felt like a home, and certainly no space, as Justine had alluded to, for child contact within them spaces. But just by offering high quality homes to any individuals that we're supporting, we hear how it enables people to feel respected and proud of the homes, and in turn will support individuals in sustaining that property, because a lot of people will come with sort of tenancy and housing management needs as well if there's been sort of failed, like saying failed tenancies, but multiple different tenancies. So just a simple fact of providing high quality nice homes for people, we're already starting in a place where people feel comfortable. So a little bit more around our peer support and our drop-in group. So it's a monthly space where women can attend. So this is not just open to women that's accessing the growth project. This is open to any woman in Sheffield who have experienced child removal or care proceedings. Women are really encouraged in this space to lead on what this space looks like. They've created their own activity agenda. They're encouraged to help in the sort of setting up. And sort of tidying up and welcoming sort of new members into that space. But because a lot of the women have said in one-to-one sessions or in co-production sessions the shame that they're holding around the removal, feelings of being judged, and even by close family members and friends. Accessing a group with other women that have shared same experiences feels really safe and it feels like a really non-judgmental space. So it's been quite a crucial part of the sort of project offer for a lot of women. It says 14, it's a little bit dated. We've had 19 women in Sheffield that access peer support activity group. We're really trying to sort of still focus on promoting that. But we've done activities from yoga, we've had picnics, we do a lot of crafts. Again, they pick the agenda, but we've had things like memory boxes and photo frames, so they can put photos of the children in. We've done some family life story books and family trees, embroidery, and just sort of general crafts. So that agenda is sort of set for the next few months, and within that they're asked to sort of review and amend and change. And then we are forever sort of entering conversations around thoughts on service, and we've asked women for feedback on sort of how interviewing new staff members, and asked if they want to form part of our interview panel. So, hopefully feeling as though they continue to be involved in the shaping and development of service. We do have external agencies coming in to drop in. We always agree that with women beforehand, but we've had domestic abuse services come in to offer their sort of advice and support. We've had care proceedings solicitors come in, so some women that aren't in care proceedings have still got questions around what they can do or what's the current position. We've had Sam, who's going to jump on later, that's done some sort of grounding work and meditation work, mindfulness. We've got a cost of living coordinator that comes quite regularly to sessions to help with any debts and benefits. So alongside it being the peer support group and a lot of craft activities, we do have external agencies coming to help out as well. So women that we've currently got on service, so it's 12 spaces that we have. We've actually supported 14 women now, because we've had 2 women move on to domestic abuse services, with a combined total of, it'll now be 23 looked after children. So just some of the work that the caseworkers have done with women under services. So we've had 4 women that's been supported to attend family court. So we learned quite early that is going to form quite a lot of the work that the caseworkers are involved in. So trying to navigate family court. And even questions been asked around, what do we wear? What will it be like? What does it look like when we get inside? So people that might be attending magistrates court or Crown Court, there's the opportunities for pre-trial visits to get an idea and familiarise yourself with that setting. That's not an opportunity at family court, but it's as overwhelming and as daunting. So that information does form part of our toolbox. There's like a layout of what court looks like, some recommendations on how to dress, but it's just comfort, whatever you feel comfortable in. So 4 women have been supported by the caseworkers actually in the family court. And 8 women have been supported to have contact with children. So whether that is actually in contact centres, helping support with transport, helping to navigate maybe any changes of appointments and locations and times with family time providers, or it might be supporting the relationships with family members who've got the children in their care to try and support with them managing contact. 9 of the women accessing the service have been supported to access legal advice. 9 women have been supported to social care meetings. So again, that could be SIN, core group, case conference, PLOs. And we have had 4 women enter service who have been pregnant and at risk of removal at pregnancy. And so those women particularly have been supported to access antenatal care, health care, referrals into perinatal mental health team, such a complex system to navigate. There is a review at the minute in Sheffield looking at an integrated care pathway for women experiencing mental health in perinatal period. So looking at trauma-informed approaches in the healthcare system, in meetings when women are also, pregnant and we're thinking about removal at birth. How is that information delivered and received? So yeah, that's just a look at some of the women that we are supporting in the service at the minute. And then just some comment feedbacks from some of the women. How could services better support women with these support needs or this cohort? And one of the women had said that although my needs have been at the focus of support with other support providers, with growth, children has also remained at the centre. So what we're really keen to do is, when appropriate, and to implement into conversations regularly, speaking about children, knowing that remains the focus of women's motivation, whether or not they've seen them in a week or 4 years, trying to keep that at the centre and trying to adapt support plans around what are the barriers, what do we need to address, what do you want to address wherever you are. And one of the ladies had said that I would like to have had someone to be there for me and my children earlier, but to know support won't end if my son doesn't come home, because this is when I'd need it the most. So I think we've already alluded to, but a lot of support comes to an end for women when children are removed. Social care are no longer involved. There's no longer sort of a duty for them to work with mum if children are safe. If they're in foster care, they do keep up with sort of core group meetings and SIN meetings, but that wraparound professional network is no longer available, and that is ultimately when women feel like they need some intensive support the most. And another woman said for services to know about family court, how family court works, and to help me through this. So this lady had already gone through care proceedings before she came into service, and has shared some real harrowing experiences of how difficult that were alone, especially when she'd been a victim of domestic abuse and dad was there ultimately, and there was very little protection, and she had to do a lot of it by herself with a solicitor that she'd not met before. So just some ideas of how services can maybe think about responding to and supporting women that have these experiences. And that's it. That's the end of mine in terms of the growth model. Obviously, there is the Q&A if anybody does want to pop any questions in, but I'm going to bring Sam in. I think I've overrun as well. I'm going to bring Sam in to offer an overview of the psychological intervention, which is part of the growth offer. So as part of our service model, Sam works alongside us to support the cohort of women under growth. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Becky.
Oh, there you are.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Good. Thanks for that. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sam Chu. I'm a psychologist. I've worked in homelessness for about the last 12 years. And then prior to that, spent about 15 years working in sort of criminal justice services. And since 2017, I've been working on a contract for Sheffield City Council that's involved developing psychologically and trauma-informed practice in a range of temporary accommodation and homeless services. And as part of that, we're commissioned to deliver 15 hours a week of therapy to women who access those services. So prior to my involvement with the Growth Project, had supported a lot of women who had experienced or were experiencing child removal, and it was becoming something that I was incredibly passionate about. So I was really pleased to be asked to be involved in the Growth Project. So what I'm just going to talk to you about for the next 15 minutes is just a little bit about why we need kind of psychological support for women accessing services like growth. And I think a lot of what I'm talking about spans other services as well, for women. And also then just a little bit about what the psychological offer is within growth. So just moving on. So I just want to highlight some of the sort of common psychological needs amongst women who access growth, but also some of the other services I work with. And a lot of this has been touched on already and won't be a surprise, I think, to many of you. But often this ongoing issues about trauma and also intergenerational trauma. And this cycle of kind of adverse childhood experiences that just kind of repeats. And as Justine mentioned in her presentation, about, I think she said 40% of women who experience child removal have had care histories themselves. So there is that just cycle of history repeating itself. And often I think what happens is that either those have had care experiences or women have been left in family situations that have been harmful as children and contributed to their difficulties in adulthood. And then sometimes what we see is that their parents actually then end up with a special guardianship order for their children. So that adds to that trauma then that their parents couldn't adequately care for them, but then they're being given the opportunity to look after their children. So it becomes really a complicated situation. There's also a huge amount, as what's has already been alluded to, about relationship difficulties and particularly around domestic abuse. A lot of the women I work with are experiencing child removal due to domestic abuse, and often the onus is put on the women to protect the children, remove herself from that relationship with very little real understanding about coercive control and domestic abuse and why it's so difficult for women to leave relationships. And on top of that, their whole often complex attachment histories as well, which add to that. And also, I don't know whether there's any particular research about this, but anecdotally, what I find is that often the perpetrator's family end up looking after the children, which just continues to perpetuate that abuse and kind of coercive control. So lots of issues around relationships and attachment in this group of women. Poor mental health problems, not surprising given the kind of trauma and attachment and adversity that I've already spoken about. And then often the way of coping with that is substance abuse to some extent, whether that's more lower level or kind of chronic substance abuse. Quite often there's poverty and social disadvantage. That's already been touched on, and then you add to that other aspects such as race, and other ways in which women are discriminated against, and feel really powerless in this system. And that often leads to lots of unexpressed anger. And we know that, it's much less socially desirable for women to express anger and is often viewed negatively, certainly by social care if there are anger issues or there's frustration and anger expressed during those interactions. And actually, there's lots that the women have an absolute right to be angry about, and there's very little opportunity to express that. As Justine already mentioned, there's huge issues around grief and loss over child removal, and often that's multiple removals. And this notion of the kind of disenfranchised grief. So because nobody's died, it's not really treated as grief in the same way that we might think about grief after a bereavement. But actually, the feelings and processes attached to that psychologically are kind of huge. So that needs acknowledging really and support around that. All of those things that I mentioned already contribute to low self-confidence, low self-efficacy. So people just feeling that they're stuck in this cycle, feeling powerless. and full of shame. It's already been mentioned about loss of identity. So children are the identity. We've talked a lot about women having children removed at birth, but I've worked with women who've had children removed much later in life. Kind of having brought up children a child for 14 years, and then that child's removed. That social network for that mum is lost. Going to school mums, that's not an option for that person anymore. Lots of shame and stigma, feeling judged by other people, not being, normally being recognised in that community as being a mum or being someone who's pregnant, and then people are kind of curiously asking questions. It just makes going out much harder and increases social anxiety. Lots of shame and guilt and self-blame, which contributes to that low self-confidence. And then on top of all this, we've got the whole process of going through social care proceedings is hugely re-traumatizing. And I think I hear a lot that services say they're working in a trauma-informed way, but actually they're not really. The kind of policies and procedures are not aligned really to trauma-informed practice. There might be the little kind of tweak here and there, but I think there's still a long way to go in terms of how do we make this better for parents, even if removal is going to be the outcome. It's still about how do we make that process less traumatic as possible, really, and trying to minimize that power imbalance. And really understanding the mum's perspective, both in terms of where there is domestic violence, what is it about that situation for mum? What is it about her attachment, her relationships? Where does she need that support? And bringing that support in much earlier rather than in that final kind of period before final proceedings. And acknowledging that contact can be hugely painful. As much as mums want to see their children, the leaving at the end of that is just destroying for them. So some women avoid contact because it's too painful. So it's in that context that a service like Growth really needs to have that sort of psychological support for the women, and one of the strengths of the service, alongside all the other things that have been discussed. So just to say a little bit about what's offered, and I'll talk about each of these things in more detail in a minute. So we offer individual psychological therapy, there's group work, and then also staff training and support, which includes regular reflective practice. So in terms of the individual psychological therapy, we offer a trauma-informed approach to build those positive, authentic therapeutic relationships. There's a lot of literature now around the value of that therapeutic relationship as being the biggest predictor of successful therapy, successful outcomes of therapy. So making sure that we are able to take time as well to build positive and authentic relationships with the women is really important. We offer a range of psychological assessments and interventions, and I think initially when we went into this, we were thinking more about offering the therapeutic work, but actually what we found is that some women have needed some assessments to help them through that court process. So we've done autism assessments for in a case where autism was flagged up as a possibility, but then the court didn't want to delay the process or commission an autism assessment, so we were able to offer that. Similarly with cognitive assessments, where someone had been assessed years ago as having a cognitive impairment, but there were lots of issues around the context of that, so that needed repeating. And there wasn't the kind of resourcing to do that through the court, so we were able to offer that and present that information at court. So there's definitely a need for the assessment side as well as the intervention. And when we're doing the interventions, it's very person-centered, we're trauma-informed, we want to offer lots of choice and control. So we're really flexible about where it takes place, how long the session is, and what time that happens to try and maximise the likelihood of that person being able to attend. We can offer a range of different therapeutic approaches, depending on where that person's at and what they feel safe being able to do at that time. So sometimes it might be more stabilisation work to help with emotional regulation. It might be psychoeducation work to help them understand what they've experienced and how it's contributing to their ongoing difficulties. We offer schema therapy, which I'll say a little bit more about in a minute. We've recently introduced an art therapy student who's doing some art therapy group, an art therapy group and some one-to-ones as well, and some trauma focused sort of cognitive therapy as well. And what we want to do is offer both a responsive and a preemptive approach. So sometimes we work with women who've got recommendations from the court to engage in therapy, and often the time frame is very short for that. The goals are huge, and there's within mainstream services, there's absolutely no chance of that need being met. So we try to be able to be responsive to that and offer that and work with the women so that when they go back to court, they can demonstrate that they've engaged in that work. We also try to be preemptive though, because we, from experience of working with women going through family proceedings, we get a sense of the kinds of things that are coming up from social care around relationships, impact of domestic abuse on children, emotional regulation, those kind of things. So it might be that we would work with someone to identify what might be relevant with them and start working on those things before those social work assessments are completed. So just a little bit about schema therapy. So I'm an accredited schema therapist. It's an approach that I really value and I think works really nicely with people who've experienced lots of trauma and attachment difficulties throughout their life. And it kind of works really on those core beliefs or schemas that develop in kind of less helpful ways due to early life experiences. So without saying too much, because I'm mindful of time, but it involves kind of having a very collaborative assessment. It involves some psychoeducation about what schema therapy is, what the model looks like, developing common language to work together to identify sort of thoughts that are coming up, belief systems that are coming up, and different kind of coping modes as well. It has a real emphasis on thinking about coping modes and developing more alternative, healthy ones. At the heart of schema therapy is this notion about unmet core emotional needs. So the whole kind of therapeutic approach is about attunement to those needs, helping people spot which needs they're trying to get met in certain situations and developing healthier ways of meeting those needs. It can involve processing traumatic memories if that's appropriate, and through that helping to heal those schemas. And what we do is look at people's coping styles. So we help people to be able to identify those. And then what we do is empathically confront those and work with those and challenge those and develop new ones. And ultimately, what we're working towards is strengthening this idea about an internal parent, that inner voice that can kind of parent us, that kind of champions us, knows what our limits are, sets boundaries, but is also kind of building confidence and saying positive things. So we can help people then to meet their own kind of emotional needs in much more healthy ways. So we the plan was to offer some group work, but there's been such a good kind of uptake of the one-to-one that at the moment we're not running that some of the group work that I had in mind, which was around looking at that core needs model and thinking about how it might contribute to some of the difficulties that people experience themselves in parenting, but also then helping them to develop kind of good psychological parenting moving forwards for their own children. That's something that I'd definitely like to explore in the future. But like I said, at the moment, we've been doing lots of kind of one-to-one therapeutic work. I've already mentioned that we've got an art therapy student offering groups and some one-to-one work as well. And we've done an input to the drop-in around coping skills, but I think there's also scope for kind of a trauma psychoeducation group as well. So just to say a little bit more about that kind of unmet needs and parenting, really, I think it's a really nice model to use to think about how mum's kind of unmet core emotional needs in childhood have affected her ability to care for her own children. And then increasing that awareness about what the unmet core emotional needs might be for their own children, and then moving forwards to think about how do I meet children's needs, but also meet my own emotional needs as well. So I think there's a lot of scope to kind of develop that further with the women. Then just in terms of staff training and support, so we offer training on psychologically and trauma-informed approaches. We meet with staff to do psychological case formulations and from that develop psychologically informed support planning. There's also a consultation with staff from other services if there's multi-agency working, or certainly being part of kind of child protection groups, core groups, and bringing in that kind of psychologically informed perspective to that. And then also offering more ad hoc clinical supervision, but also regular reflective practice groups for the staff as well. So that brings me to the end of my section. I'm going to hand over now to Poppy. If you do have any questions, please use the chat or the Q&A, and we'll do our best to answer those before the end of the session. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Sam. Poppy, are you there? Can I see you on my screen?
I am here. Oh, hang on. Oh,
yeah, I can see you.
oh, right. I was just going to say I'm not a very good talker, so yeah.
Well, I was
I've
also
got
going to
notes in your
say
phone.
you're very humble, and so I don't know. You obviously absolutely introduce yourself, but Poppy started off as one of the volunteers at Changing Futures in the co-production service, and she's now one of our peer support workers supporting the core team and the cohort in Changing Futures as well. You're probably too humble to talk about yourself too much, Poppy. So I'll pass over to you, and yeah.
So I left local authority care when I was 18, and there was no support. I had a leave-in care worker, but she was based in Norwich, which was 7 hours away from the children's home that I was in. So I didn't get much support from my leave-in care worker or the service that I'd come from. So I was kind of left on my own at 18. I got into a relationship, and this was quite a bad relationship. And due to mental health and DV relationship, I lost my first daughter to adoption. So going back a little, sorry. I kind of had to, because the family court said that I needed so many years of therapy, and they basically told social services to pay for it, but because they didn't pay for it, my ex paid for it, so it kind of made me stay in that relationship because he was paying for the therapy, and because of the timescales, like it was just never going to happen, the timescales of what I needed. But because he was paying for it, I kind of felt like I had to stay with him. Um, yes. 1 second. So when I lost my oldest daughter, it made me like turn to drugs and alcohol and having loads of unprotected sex and just like really bad like self-harming behavior. Um, on the last contact session with my daughter, I did take her from contact, which led me to having a criminal record of kidnap. So I've got like a criminal record now because of that. Uh, 1 second. So I got pregnant again from that, and then I went into a refuge in Newcastle. This was at the time of COVID, so I only had about 4 face-to-face contacts with my daughter before she was adopted. And then again from the adoption of Eliza, again I turned to Class A drugs again, and fell into a situation of drug trafficking with a group of people who was kind of like giving me free drugs kind of thing and using my home to sell drugs from. Um, um, 1 second. I'll just when the police did intervene in the drug trafficking charges, I was seen as a victim, and then I was moved to Sheffield, into a safe house. At that point, I found out I was pregnant again. Um, so my little boy was taken into foster care from birth. I did manage to get him back when he was 7 months old because I was doing everything. I was a volunteer with Changing Futures and putting my experiences into the work that we were doing there. Um, I did try going to services to help me deal with the loss of my two oldest daughters, but because I still had children in my care, they said I couldn't basically get the support because I've still got a child, even though he wasn't in my care at the time. But because I still had a child, I wasn't um what's the word, eligible for the support. And at the time, that was the only one in Sheffield. So I was kind of dealing with the loss kind of on my own and then trying to deal with social services in Sheffield, which to be fair were a lot better than what I've experienced in every other place that I've lived. Like I felt like Sheffield wanted me to get my son home, and I think that's why I did, whereas the other places, like as soon as I met him, it was like, yeah, they don't want me to keep my child, so I'm not going to. But I had a really good experience with Sheffield, most of it. When he was going to be reunited with me, um, the place that I was staying didn't take babies, so the local council offered me a one-bedroom flat, as I was still technically a single person because my son wasn't in my care. So I was offered a one-bedroom flat. Um, but then obviously it would mean I'd have to move again when it's already been so much upheaval for my son leaving the foster carers to come back to me. At the very, very, very last minute, I think like the day before I was meant to get him home, I was put into Cuthbert Bank in Sheffield. And yeah, that's kind of where I am now. And then I got a paid job with South Yorkshire Housing Association to be a peer support worker with Changing Futures. And yeah, I'm here now. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think we have still got a couple of minutes. I don't know if there's like if you had to sort of really hard because you've experienced so much, Poppy, but like a couple of main takeaways, I suppose, for either like practitioners or services that you would kind of want to see going forward. Are there any like a couple of key things that you would like to see changed or see different?
I think what growth we're doing, like the psychological support as soon as you go into proceedings, because you get to court and you get to near the end of court proceedings, and they say you need 2 years of support, but the timetable, they don't want to keep a kid in lingo for 2 years. So I think getting the support straight away, it gives women a much better chance of saying, look, I've already done like a year and a half. What's another 6 months of waiting for me? But if it's a 2 year, it's like it's too long. So I think yeah, getting psychological support as soon as possible, because I swear like every family court wants it for like they want some kind of psychological support. Um, and then I suppose just the like surely like the services that I couldn't go to because I still had a child, surely there would be other ways of helping me and others out there who have still got a kid in their care, because my two oldest daughters do still matter. They were still adopted, but because I've got a child, it's like, don't worry, you lost them two, but you can keep this one. But they're still they're still missing from my life until 18 or hopefully earlier because of social media, but they still matter. And yeah, I think that shouldn't be a barrier because you've still got a child to get support.
Mm-hmm. And I know you've been involved in like some of the the co-production work for growth, and then obviously you've done other stuff through the co-production service, and then you're going to be speaking to we've got like a group perinatal group involving social care. You're going to be doing that, so I think all that kind of links into not only like talking about your experience, but like you say, that peer support from other women who've been through similar, and how a lot of your experiences beforehand, you can really doubt yourself throughout all of that and kind of lose yourself. And actually, when you speak to other women that have been through the same, it's like, oh, that was what happened to me as well. And there's kind of that real recognition of these are systemic kind of issues that are repeating themselves over long periods of time for like multiple women, and how that's empowering when you've been through a really disempowering process.
Yep. I'm waiting for a job to come up at Growth so I can be a support. Us both are in here.
Okay, who knows? Hopefully soon.
Brill. And that you'll probably hopefully get a chance to look in the chat, Poppy, but there's loads of people saying thank you so much for like sharing your experience.
I'm not the best of talkers. But...
No, what you're saying is spot on. Doesn't matter how you say it. So Brill. I just having a look. So I think we're probably good. I think some people are popping off anyway. So on behalf of myself and Poppy and Sam and Rebecca, thank you so much for coming this afternoon. I don't know if our contact details will get shared as part of everything going out. I think they will. But if you want to get in touch with any of us for a bit more information about anything that we're doing, and we'd love to hear from other areas as well. It's not a very publicised kind of bits of work, and there's loads of good practice across the country, and it's always great to share ideas and be inspired by each other. So please do get in touch if you've got something going off in your local area that would be great to talk about. And once again, thank you so much for being here.